welcome, and thanks for joining us. My name is Robert. I'll be your host. This is the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. live stream tour. Thanks so much for being here. So we always welcome people to introduce themselves in the Zoom chat or the Q&A. You can let us know your first name, where you're connecting from, and have you visited any Holocaust museums or sites. I've really enjoyed doing these live stream programs for the past, we're going on 3 years now, because people have put in a lot of sites that I wasn't familiar with and recommendations and things like that. So I greatly appreciate that. And then just a real quick Zoom check-in. The audience will be in listen-only mode or muted. If you want to raise or lower the volume on your session, you can check the settings locally on your own device. If you want to adjust the screen display so that the slides and the videos that we're showing take up the full screen, you can look for something on your device called either View or View Options. And there's a feature called Side-by-Side Mode you can check off. We are actually going to be showing 4 short videos that are each about 2 minutes. 2 of them relate to objects. Well, 3 of them. 2 of them relate directly to objects that are at the Holocaust Museum. Another one is about a film that's related to a Holocaust object in the museum. And then the 4th one is a film that Patty told me about that's related to Anne Frank. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then just FYI, if you have any questions or comments throughout our program, feel free to share those in the chat or the Q&A. So this is one of 3 Holocaust-related programs that we do, all of them over Zoom. The first one we do is called Anne Frank's Europe, before, during, and after her diary. So this covers Anne's life, and it does readings from her diary and things like that. It's not on our calendar, but we'll be repeating it sometime probably later this summer. Anne was born in July of 1929, and so usually that month we do programs to recognize her birthday, so be on the lookout for that. And then we also do a program called Auschwitz and the Holocaust, which is a live stream tour of the Auschwitz site. Again, also not on our calendar. We just did this program a few weeks ago, and I'm sure we'll do it again at some point in time in the near future. But today's program is a live stream tour of the United States Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C., which is one of the largest and best Holocaust museums in the world. And here is a picture from the outside. So a long time ago, before COVID, I used to give in-person tours of different things in Washington, D.C. And this was one of the sites that I used to go take tours of people on. It was really fabulous. It was really a moving experience for me to take people on tours through the museum, because so many people told me that they had never been there before. And so it was really great to show people around for the first time. A lot of people brought their children, things like that. So my name is Robert Kellerman. I'll be your host. A little bit about myself. I was a art history major in college. I grew up in Detroit. I lived in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. before moving to Texas. I don't have any ties to the Holocaust. I'm not Jewish that I know of. And I don't know any family members that were involved in the Holocaust. I just think it's a really fascinating topic. On the one hand, very tragic and brutal how people could do things like that to one another. But then also too, on the other side, there's a lot of courageousness and faith and hope in the Holocaust and some of the objects we're going to be talking about. And so I like that part of the story as well. So thanks so much for being here. And this is me. This picture was actually taken just a few days before the whole world shut down with COVID back in 2020. So kind of hard to imagine that this was 3 years ago, but we'll do the tour at some point in time again in the near future, because I go back to Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. And we also have our host, Patty, joining us. Hi, Patty. Thanks again for being here. How are you doing this afternoon, and what's going on?
Well, hello, everybody. Each time we see this, those words echo in my brain, never forget, because gosh, sometimes lately it seems like we're in danger of forgetting, doesn't it? So I'm so glad to see.
Unfortunately.
I'm sorry?
I said it does, unfortunately, which is why we keep doing these programs.
Exactly. I'm really glad to see so many people here, and look forward to their comments, because it is, to me, no matter how many times I've seen it, it's just very moving. So yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, myself too. I mean, I know a fair amount about the Holocaust, but I've always learned a lot hosting these programs. So thanks so much for all of you for joining us, and thank you, Patty, for being here.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, and then Patty, again, thanks for the heads up on the film. You were the first I've heard about it a lot since you first told me about it, but you were the first person who told me about the film. And I'm going to play a short clip from it a little bit later. So I really greatly appreciate you giving me the scoop on that, and we'll talk about that film a little bit later. So thank you so much, Patty.
Well, I try to keep my ear to the ground, Robert.
You do. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, well, let's get started. So before we begin, kind of alluded to this a little bit just a minute ago, but is studying the Holocaust still relevant today? You know, the Holocaust ended, at least the Holocaust that we're referring to, ended in 1945, and a lot of time has passed since then. So it's still relevant to be studying this today. Well, just from a kind of a United States perspective, since we're an American-based organization, and I'm American myself, just to give you some context. So for World War II, usually kind of the official start date is 1939. Although that date varies depending on the event. The first you're speaking to ended in 1945. The World War II Memorial, the United States National World War II Memorial, which ironically enough is only a half a mile from the Holocaust Memorial Museum. There were 405,000 Americans killed on the military side during World War II, and the total worldwide deaths, military and civilian, during World War II, 70 million or over 70 million. So really incredible. So a monumental event in world history. And yet there's people still going around saying the Holocaust didn't happen, or if it did happen, it didn't happen to the extent that people are saying, and all that kind of stuff. So, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, but just kind of shocking that people would still think this. And then what really bothers me is here in the United States, you still see the Nazi flag displayed periodically, which is very troubling. So here's the flag. This gentleman over here, he's doing the Heil Hitler salute. And this is in a country where over 400,000 men gave their lives to end Nazi rule, among other things that they were fighting for during the war. So just kind of incredible from an American standpoint that people would still be kind of in favor of this. And an organization that does a lot of interesting work is the Southern Poverty Law Center. And one of the things that they are famous for is they track hate groups. Now, these aren't necessarily hate groups against Jews. This is any type of hate, hate against blacks, hate against whites, hate against women, hate against any type of group. They track it. And you can see as of 2 years ago, the last time they did their study, there's over 700 hate groups in the United States, some of them more well-known than others. And so just really amazing that we're still kind of dealing with some of these issues today. So that being said, if you want to learn more about this, just Google Southern Poverty Law Center hate map, and some of the organizations that they've categorized as hate groups you've probably heard of. And then just some others, you look at the map, they're pretty much all over the United States. They're pretty amazing. And then the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. likes to say that anti-Semitism didn't end with the Holocaust. So is studying the Holocaust still relevant today? Yes, definitely. So that's the context of our talk. And let's discuss the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And Patty, feel free to chime in whenever you desire to. Here is the outside of the museum. It actually has two entrances, a front entrance and a back entrance. And the museum is celebrating its 30th anniversary, which is one reason why I wanted to do the program around this time of year. It opened in April of 1993, so 30 years in existence. And usually, sometimes we have the program this time of year because early May is the end of World War II in Europe. And then just some facts about the Holocaust Memorial Museum. This data is from pre-COVID, but most of it is still irrelevant. So again, celebrating the 30th anniversary last month. Look at this, total visitors to date. This is before COVID. Over 45 million people have visited the museum. That's incredible. The demographics, currently 24% are school children, they estimate. There's a lot of international visitors. When I used to host tours of the museum in person, it was really amazing to me how many people were visiting Washington, D.C. from other countries and wanted to go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. So that was nice to see. And then approximately 90% are non-Jewish. So not everyone that goes there, of course, is Jewish. And then as far as the website goes, in 2019, 19.8 million visitors. I'm sure that's gone up a lot since then, just because of the self-quarantine and things like that. And visitors from more than 238 countries and territories. And look, 45% of the visitors to the museum's websites are from outside the US. So the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., it serves a number of roles. One of them is it's really just an outstanding resource for Holocaust education. And so that's why so many people end up visiting the museum in person and going to the website, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you are in Washington, D.C., or if you've been to Washington, D.C., the architect of the Holocaust Museum, a gentleman by the name of James Ingo Fried, he has since passed. He designed two other very noteworthy Washington, D.C. structures. If you recognize the building on the top right, that's the Ronald Reagan building. It's not too far from the White House. And then also the United States Air Force Memorial on the bottom right. So James Ingo Fried, he designed the Ronald Reagan building, a very prominent landmark in Washington, D.C. Great place to park if you're ever visiting Washington, D.C. and you're looking for a parking spot. I parked in that. They have an underground parking garage that I've parked at dozens and dozens of times over the years. So highly recommend that. And they also have a pretty good food court. And then the United States Air Force, where I actually used to live not very far from here. And I drove by this structure or site every day on my way to work. So it's really cool to see, but he's also the designer of that. So really incredible, because these buildings are all these structures are all very unique and distinctive. Not a lot of similarities between the three. So anyway, he's the architect, and he himself was a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Germany, and his family escaped Germany during the 1930s. So James Ingo Fried, the architect of the Holocaust Memorial Museum, a Holocaust survivor himself. I read a book that he wrote, and he talked about this was the hardest design he ever did. He just couldn't even figure out where to start, how to make it, what it should look like, just all these different ideas and things. And then eventually he was able to put it all together. Now, if you've not been to Washington, D.C. before, if you're not familiar with where the Holocaust Museum is, so here's the National Mall. And then over here, you have the Lincoln Memorial at one end. Over here, you have the Capitol at the other end. And then you have the White House, and then the Tidal Basin. And so the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is right here. So it's right off the National Mall. It's like one block from the southern point of the National Mall. And this is the Washington Monument right here. So it's really easy to get to. So FYI on that. And then this is the official name of the site. Sometimes people in DC, they shorten it and just say Holocaust Museum. But the official name of this site is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. So it's the official United States memorial and museum to the Holocaust. So it kind of serves these two different roles. On the one hand, it's a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. And on the other hand, it's also a museum that tells the story of the Holocaust and educates people about the Holocaust. So again, the official name of this site is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. But if you're talking to someone in DC, they might just say like the Holocaust Museum. And then this is interesting. I used to, when we did our in-person tours, I like to start right here and tell people to meet at this sign. And then we just look at this again when we got done. But think about what you saw. So really the museum is an educational organization to a large degree. So the next time you witness hatred, the next time you see injustice, the next time you hear about genocide, think about what you saw. So they really want you to experience these exhibits and then kind of remember what you've seen. And then at some point in time, if you find yourself in some situation where you think people are being treated differently than the way they should, you can kind of refer back to the Holocaust things that you saw. And then here's the outside of the museum. This is the back side. And so if you're not familiar with DC, the National Mall is over here out of the photo. And then interestingly enough, this is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. They actually do a really cool tour there, show you how money is made. And let's see what else. If you're ever trying to park over here, like it's best to take the metro. But if you are visiting the museum and parking, because the mall is over here, the best place to park if you have your car and you're just looking for like a meter, like a street parking is like over here. So if you're familiar with DC, most people park over by the National Mall. There's a lot of street parking over here. So just FYI on that. And then this is the back of the museum and has these sculptures. So this one is a house that's been overturned, and it's really representational of the fact that World War II just turned Europe upside down. So this is a house, a sculpture of a house been overturned. And then this sculpture over here is all this jagged lines. It might look like a modern art sculpture, and you might think it doesn't have any meaning, but it really does. The designer of this sculpture put this together to kind of show the devastation that the Holocaust did to Europe and to people's lives. Notice how there's all these jagged angles, and it's not really an identifiable object anymore, really kind of representational of what happened during the Holocaust. And then a key player during World War II, of course, was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, as the supreme commander of the Allied forces. This is a picture of him, a colorized photo of him taken shortly before the D-Day invasion. And Eisenhower visited the some of the Holocaust sites, where some of these camps where these things have been taking place. So here he is, here in the center. And the courtyard that I was just showing you, go back, this courtyard is actually called the Eisenhower Courtyard. And there's actually a new Eisenhower Memorial that's just a few blocks down the road from here. So that's why also on that. But anyway, this is Eisenhower. He and his men visited these camps, and he was really moved by this experience. And so there's a quote from Eisenhower on the exterior wall of the Holocaust Museum. And so it's important to point this out. And so this is what he had to say, talking about his time visiting these camps, these concentration camps after they were liberated. He said, "The things I saw beggar description. The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering. I made the visit deliberately in order to be in a position to give firsthand evidence of these things, if ever in the future there develops a tendency to charge these allegations to propaganda." So he actually spoke with a number of people that were in the camps when they were liberated. So it wasn't just like he was receiving reports on what happened. He talked to people face to face and learned about their experiences. But pretty interesting for me that Eisenhower had the foresight to know that at some point in time, people would probably try and dismiss this as not happening, or say it didn't happen to the extent that it did. So that was pretty striking to me. And then let's watch a short video. So this is an actual official video from the Holocaust Museum itself. And I thought it did a pretty good job of kind of giving you an overview of what's there. It's a little bit older. So a few of the things minor, there's been a few minor changes since this video was done, but I do think it gives kind of a quick overview of the museum and the memorial. So let's cue this up. And again, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate everyone taking time out of their schedule to learn about the Holocaust Memorial Museum.
The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, located next to the National Mall, has earned international recognition for its remarkable content and design of its exhibitions and for its award-winning architecture. At its heart is the three-floor permanent exhibition. Through one of the world's largest collections of artifacts, photographs, films, and eyewitness testimonies, the exhibition tells the complete story from the 1930s to 1945, one of history's darkest eras. You can also learn about the Holocaust and remember the children, Daniel's story, an exhibition designed especially for younger visitors and families. On the second floor is the Hall of Remembrance, a place of quiet reflection, its eternal flame as a memorial to the Holocaust victims. American school children were a part of the museum's creation, and downstairs is a wall of over 3,000 tiles they painted in honor of 1.5 million children who were Holocaust victims. There are many other ways to learn about Holocaust history in the museum, including a rotating schedule of special exhibitions, a learning center, and opportunities to meet and speak with Holocaust survivors. Entrance to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is free of charge. The museum is open daily from 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. For additional information, visit the museum's award-winning website, www.ushmm.org.
So they pointed out the admission to the museum is free. If you want to go during peak tourist season, you need to reserve your tickets ahead of time. You don't need to reserve them like 3 months ahead of time. But if you go like in the summer or during a holiday, when there's a lot of tourists in DC, you oftentimes can't just show up and go to the museum because there's such a demand to go visit this place. And there's only so many people that they can allow in at any given time. So if you are going to be visiting, especially if it's during peak tourist time in DC, which is like the weekends, the summer, holidays, things like that, make sure you reserve your tickets in ahead of time. Again, it doesn't need to be 3 months in advance or 6 months in advance. Usually just a few days or weeks will be fine, but please do that. And then someone pointed out, I said earlier when I was talking about the World War II deaths, if I said 405,000 men, I misspoke. It was men and women. So my apologies if I had a slip of tongue on that. So thank you very much for pointing that out. I'm sorry about that. If you do visit the museum, sometimes when we visit museums, myself included, we're tempted to just walk through the front door and start looking around at stuff. When you come here, it's probably a good idea if you check in at the visitor information desk. This is the main lobby of the museum. This is the front entryway. And then here's the visitor information desk. It's a good idea to check in there and ask them if they have any special programs going on that day. Like, for instance, they might tell you, oh, we're having a tour at 12 o'clock, or we're having a lecture at 2 o'clock, or something like that. Information you wouldn't have if you just walked in the front door. And then here's another view. This is the steps leading down from the main exhibition. So what you do is you come over here and you take the elevator up to the top, and the permanent exhibit is up here. And then you kind of work your way down, and then you end up right here. And then if you want, you can look around some more, or you can walk down the steps and out the door. Now, this picture is helpful because the architect of the museum, he talked about how he was really inspired by interviewing people that were Holocaust survivors. And a lot of times those individuals spoke about how they felt trapped, and they would look up towards the sky, either for some type of divine faith or intervention or something like that, or they wish they were birds and could just fly away. So to people, oftentimes that were trapped in these confined spaces, whether it was Anne Frank hiding out in her secret annex, or someone enclosed in a ghetto environment or a concentration camp, this idea of looking up towards the sky or looking up towards the heavens. And so he incorporates a lot of windows and skylights in the building. It has a lot of natural light. And so that's something you see over and over again as you're traveling through the building. It also has a very kind of industrial type design. One of the things that Nazis were known for was their architecture, and how like cold it was. So this entryway here with like the brick and the steel and things like that is really, it's kind of like an industrial feel, much different than like a regular museum. And then this is a view. This was our tour group. And so this is the front entryway behind us. This is when you walk through the front door and you're looking in the museum. And again, here's this beautiful skylight, which adds a lot of great natural light to the building. And then here's the information desk right here. And then the elevators, which take you up to the permanent exhibit, are over here. And then again, this is this metal beam, or these metal beams here, again, representation of this industrial architecture. It's got the red brick, very different. So you could spend a lot of time just talking about the architecture of the building because it is really fascinating. And he really put a lot of thought into all the different aspects of it. So that's interesting to note as well, if you're an architecture buff. And then they have these banners hanging in the main entryway. The museum is not an answer, it is a question. So kind of what I mean by that is like, why did the Holocaust happen? Why did people do these things? Stuff like that. So something to consider. All right. So the main thing that people go see when they visit the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. is the permanent exhibit. They do have some temporary exhibits, but the main thing that people go there for is to see this permanent exhibit, which is really well done. So let's talk about that. And when you show up there and check in, they'll give you one of these identification cards, and they have different ones for men and women. And well, first of all, it says on the cover, "For the dead and living, we must bear witness." And so you open this up, and what it does is it tells you the story of an individual person and their experience during the Holocaust. And so this is really touching because, we hear things like, oh, 6 million people, 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. And it might be kind of hard to wrap our arms around that, personalize that. But these booklets do that. And so as you're reading through these stories of all these different people, if you're in a group of people, each person will get a different book. So I've gotten these books on numerous occasions, and I don't think I've ever, like dozens and dozens of times, and I don't think I've ever gotten the same person twice. So they have a lot of them. And then again, it just goes through and explains the person's individual story. And then it does it in the format of corresponding it to the permanent exhibit. So there's 3 levels of the permanent exhibit. And if you were to flip this book, each page would talk about what the particular person that you've been assigned to was doing during that time. And at the very end, the moving part of this is it tells you if the person survived the Holocaust or not. So that's very striking. And then when you're done, you can keep this book as like a memento or an educational resource, or you can turn it back in and they'll recycle it. So make sure you get that. And then you go upstairs and you take the elevator up to the top floor, and then the exhibit is a top-down format. So you take the elevator up and, okay, this is what you see. So this was when one of the camps was liberated. This is the American troops, and what's happening here, a lot of the photos, I tried not to show you any that were too graphic, because I know sometimes people have children watching these programs. But this one is a little bit more graphic than normal, per se, for this. There are some very graphic photos and videos at the museum, but the exhibit is configured in a way where you don't have to see those if you're not comfortable. I guess I'll put it that way. Like there'll be a warning saying, if you go into this area or if you look at this particular section, you might see something disturbing. What's happening here is before the Nazis lost this camp, they tried to dispose of a lot of the bodies of the dead Jews. And so they piled wood and things on top of these bodies and tried to burn them, but they weren't successful in doing that before the Allies showed up and liberated the camp. And so you have these troops seeing all this. And then, if you go to an art museum, or any type of museum, there's usually a lot to look at. This museum, though, there's really, really a lot, and it can almost be kind of like visually overwhelming just because there's so much stuff to see. If you're kind of used to like a museum, like an art museum, when you go to a wall, there's like 3 or 4 paintings, and then you kind of move on. There's just so many objects and photographs and videos and there's things to look at. And then, the videos are streaming, and so there's sound, and it's really a lot to process. And then I think too, some people, I just know this from giving tours, some people can't make it through the whole exhibit, and that's fine. A confession to make: the first time I visited the Holocaust Museum many, many years ago, I only went through half of the permanent exhibit, and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to have to come back and process this on a later date. So if that happens to you, that's totally fine. And hey, if you only make it through part of this program, that's fine. Just appreciate everyone wanting to learn more about this. But there's a lot to see and a lot to look at, and it can take quite a while to do so. You probably, if you're going to be visiting, you probably want to budget at least 2 hours to visit here, but that's really, really cutting it short. A better approach would be maybe like 3 or 4 hours. There's a small cafe where you can stop and get lunch if you need a snack. And then some people easily spend a whole entire day here. It's that large facility. This particular section of the museum exhibit talks about the Nazi rise to power, which is a really fascinating subject, like how could these people get into these positions of power and take over things very quickly, and then enact all these laws and rules and regulations and things like that. So a really interesting part of this permanent exhibit is the Nazi rise to power. And you have this photo showing the police working in cahoots, so to speak, with the military. And then you have the ferocious dog. And then, the early stages of the Holocaust, it's more about persecuting the Jews in terms of kind of like harassing them, trying to intimidate them and things like that. And so what's happening here is they have a lot of great photographs on display during the exhibit. This particular one, what they're doing is this is an actual official Nazi members, and they're posting signs on this business identifying this as a Jewish store. And, the government is doing this, and they're hoping that this is going to intimidate people from not wanting to shop there, hopefully causing some kind of financial harm to the owners of this business. And so really incredible to, this isn't just a mob of random people. This is the government doing this. So imagine if someone showed up at your place of business and did something like this. So incredible. And they seem pretty content doing this type of activity. They don't seem disgusted by this in any way. If you look at the photo of the two men there, they're the first temporary exhibit that the Holocaust Museum had was called The State of Deception, the Power of Nazi Propaganda. And there's a book that they put out accompanying the exhibit. I actually have this book. It's really excellent. I was thinking maybe someday, maybe doing a program about this topic, because it is so fascinating how the Nazis rose to power so quickly and how they really changed the trajectory of the country so dramatically. But anyway, this book is something I really highly recommend if you want to learn more about this particular topic. And then this exhibit, which was the first temporary exhibit of the Holocaust Museum in DC, it's actually now a traveling exhibit, and you can visit it at different museums throughout the United States. It was in Richmond, Virginia several years ago. It was in Chicago. I think at one point in time it was in Las Vegas. So some of these Holocaust Museum exhibits, even if you don't live in Washington, D.C., you may have an opportunity to see them in person if they're traveling. And of course, there's also online resources. And so this part of the story is they're just really pumping out all this propaganda and trying to raise division between the different groups of people in Germany. So these are two famous propaganda posters. This one is showing a Jewish man. And it's trying to portray him as like being a banker who's in charge of the economy and having a lot of power. This is a famous propaganda piece. This is the flags of the UK, United States, and Soviet Union. And what this is trying to show is the fact that the Jews are behind the war that these three countries are fighting. So trying to blame World War II and the American, British, and Soviet participation in the war on the Jews themselves. So pretty amazing. And then this was a famous book that was published in Germany. It was for school children, and it was really to increase their anti-Semitism towards Jews. It's called The Poisonous Mushroom, and it's basically essentially Nazi propaganda. It was really interesting because a woman one time came on the in-person tour that I did, and she told me her mom or her parents had immigrated from Germany a long time ago. And when her mom passed away, she was going through her possessions, and up in the attic of her mom's house, she actually found this book, not this particular one, but a version of it. And that really kind of threw her for a loop. So anyway, it was a well-known book in Germany before World War II. And then here's a picture of children reading the book. And so if you're wondering how people got all this hate inside of them, some of that came from the fact that the official government policy was spreading this propaganda and anti-Semitism. And so the books and others like it really depict Jews as untrustworthy and corrupt, and it's such all the kind of negative things that you could think about. There's all kinds of stereotypes, and so this really plays an important role in people later fighting for the Nazis or doing what the Nazis want in terms of persecuting the Jews, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you see pictures like this of all these people showing up at these Nazi rallies. And then, of course, later everyone, oh, I didn't know anything about this, or I didn't support that, or I didn't know what was going on, and all that kind of stuff. And then, but, gosh, you look at photos like this, where there's hundreds of thousands of people. And, it wasn't long after the Nazis took over that they made their intentions clear as far as what their plan was for the Jews. So it's not like these people all signed up for this party and then later on found out that bad things were going to happen. They Nazis were very explicit about their hatred for the Jews from the get-go. So again, it was pretty amazing to look at photos like this. And then
Robert, just to interrupt 1 second too.
Sure.
I mean, one thing that I don't know if we emphasize enough, Germans had been very down and in a deep depression because of the aftermath of World War I too. So some people believe that part of why this sort of reaction to Hitlerism and Nazism came because they felt good about not having to feel bad anymore, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're finding solace and blaming someone else for all their issues or their problems. I mean, which is why they have this exhibit, because it's a fascinating topic, and you could spend hours just talking about this or discussing it, because how did this country, which was somewhat progressive before all this took place, just really go off the rails, so to speak, and end up like this? It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, and that's such a human vulnerability. If you feel lousy, you want to feel better.
Yeah. And I mean, in everywhere in the world, there's still a lot of division. I want to get into political discussion, but all types of groups now, no matter what the group is, they stir up kind of the pot, so to speak, and charge the other or some other group with all their problems, so to speak. So not anything new. But anyway, again, so these exhibits, if you can't get to Washington, D.C., they frequently loan them out to other places. So this is when the propaganda exhibit was in Chicago. You might recognize it at the train station. And so they're really proud of the fact that the access that they provide to this content, whether in person or online or through these traveling exhibits, et cetera, et cetera. If you're wondering, I forgot to mention, so I actually went to an educator symposium at the Holocaust Museum. I think it was like 2 or 3 days. It was about a year before COVID, and was really great. They actually have another one coming up in the near future that's going to be online. I'll talk about that a little bit later if you're interested. All right. So in Germany, at the time Hitler takes over, this is an interesting statistic here. So Jews in Germany, in 1933, Hitler took over in January of 1933. Only 1% of the population was Jewish. That's really striking, because it's very easy to just kind of assume that, oh, there must have been a lot of Jews in Germany. It must have been like, I don't know, 10%, 25%, 50%, because they received so much emphasis from the Nazis. But yet it was 1%. It was actually a little bit less than 1%. I think it was like 0.88%. So it's really incredible that this group, which is such a small, minute percentage of the population, just receives this incredible amount of emphasis from the Nazis. So this is a really important statistic to remember. 1% of the population in 1933. So they pretty much immediately lost all their citizenship rights. About 50% of the Jews that were living in Germany ended up emigrating to some other country before the start of World War II. And then, of course, all the persecution that takes place. This, I thought, was a really fascinating photo. They have this on display at the museum. And so what's happening here is these are judges in Nazi Germany, and they're swearing allegiance to the Nazi party. Now, think about that. Like in the United States, I know judges have their own political beliefs and stuff, but there's supposed to be kind of this, separation of powers, and people are supposed to be impartial and stuff like that. Suppose, just for example, in the United States, suppose every judge in the country had to swear allegiance to the Democratic Party or to the Republican Party or to some other party, we would really be upset with that. Like, oh God, that's not. And yeah, a lot of judges are Democrats and a lot of Republicans, and that's fine because we're a democracy and people have different ideas, and that's fine. But imagine if all the judges throughout the whole country had to swear allegiance to a political party like the Democrats and Republicans. Well, that's what happened in Nazi Germany. So what's going on in this photo is all of these judges are being sworn in, and they're swearing their allegiance to the Nazi party. And you'll see they're doing the Heil Hitler arm move. So just really incredible. And the legal system, one of the reasons why Hitler and the Nazis were able to do what they did was they are in cahoots with the law, so to speak. There's kind of famous byline, Hitler didn't do anything that was illegal because he was either operating within the law or he was just going into like gray areas and stuff. So really incredible photo if you think about these judges swearing allegiance to a political party. And then there's the whole kind of story about, well, why didn't people do more during the Holocaust to save the Jews? And what kind of information was coming out during this time? So another interesting aspect of history is to go back and see kind of what was in the media during any given time, or see what people were writing in their diaries or stuff like that, kind of go back to the time you're talking about and see what was taking place. So prior to World War II, there was some news of persecutions of the Jews reaching, say, America. So there's other examples like this for people in Britain and France and stuff like that, but I gave American examples because we're an American-based organization and we're talking about the Holocaust Museum, which is based in DC. But you can see here, Chicago Daily Tribune, Jews face drastic boycott. And then over here, you can see the New York Times, November 1938. So this is 3 years before the United States enters World War II. Nazis smash, loot, and burn Jewish shops and temples until Goebbels calls halt. So there is some news of the persecution of the Jews reaching the United States. Now, what you'll notice, though, is you don't see anything about concentration camps and gas chambers and all that stuff, because that news hadn't really gotten out yet. And it was that process, so to speak, hadn't really started yet. So there's some news of the person of the Jews reaching the average citizens of the United States, but it was a little limited. And of course, the persecution was about to get a lot worse. There's a whole room filled with all these newspaper accounts. And again, it's just really fascinating to look at media coverage of historical events and see how that was portrayed during that time and how it might be similar or different to, say, our modern thinking. And then this is a famous political cartoon. So what's happening here is here's a Jewish person or a non-Aryan, and here's a stop sign, and it's telling him to go or leave. And then here's a map kind of in the shape of a swastika, and he's not able to go anywhere. So a big problem that the Jews had is a lot of them wanted to leave Germany because they're being persecuted, but they can't go anywhere because they can't get access to any other countries. And you just can't pack up your stuff and move to some other country typically, even if you have the financial resources to do so, which oftentimes people don't have that, of course. So there's the thought behind Hitler's persecution of the Jews initially is he just wants them to leave the country and get out. But the problem is they don't have anywhere to go. They oftentimes couldn't get another country to take them in. And so this cartoon is mocking that fact, the fact that this kind of post here represents Nazi Germany. This post or this figure here represents a Jewish person or some other person that they don't want around. The Nazis are telling them to go, but they can't go anywhere because every path, you notice there's a stop sign here. And then when I used to do the in-person tours, one of the main questions that people would ask, like one of the most frequently asked questions people would ask during the Holocaust tours I used to do, why didn't the Jews just leave? Why didn't they get away from Hitler? Well, most of them did to some degree or another. And so Hitler takes over Germany in 1933. And in the next several years, 50% of the Jews that were living there left the country. They went somewhere else. The problem was they oftentimes ended up going to neighboring countries for whatever reason. And then those countries were later overrun by the Nazis. Now, if you were Jewish and you made it to the United Kingdom or the United States, you might have fared a little bit better. But the problem was a lot of the people ended up going to other countries that were taking over. And so these red areas are places that the Nazis took over. Like, so for instance, Anne Frank and her family. Her parents realized shortly after Hitler took over, this was not a good situation. And within a few months, they left the country. But the problem was they went to the Netherlands, which was later taken over by the Nazis. And so you do have a lot of people that were trying to get away from Hitler, but they didn't realize the extent of kind of what was to come later on down the road. And then this is a famous political cartoon. This is on display at the Holocaust Museum as well. This is mocking the fact that the United States is supposedly welcoming to people. This is the Statue of Liberty. And it says there's the line that's most closely associated with the Statue of Liberty, which was a line that was added later, but it's still closely associated with, give me your tired, your poor, et cetera, et cetera. And then so this is a Jewish refugee ship here, and it's saying keep out. So the United States was not really all that welcoming to Jews. Some were able to get in the country, but not as many as you might think. And we'll talk more about this particular topic, the United States and the Holocaust, towards the end of the program. Now, again, kind of to go back to that question, again, this was one of the top things people asked me during the tour. Why didn't the Jews just, why would people let Hitler capture them and send them to gas chambers? Well, it's way more complex than that. But let me give you a couple examples of people that did escape Hitler. So these Time magazine covers of Freud on the left and Einstein on the right. And so let's talk about their experiences. So Einstein was away from Germany when things got really bad, and he was thinking about going back, but his friends and family members convinced him, no, that's not a good idea. You should stay away. And so he ended up doing. So Einstein was fortunate in the sense that he was able to kind of get out before things got really bad. And then when they really deteriorated, he was somewhere else. So he was fortunate in that regard. Freud, who during his lifetime was world famous. He was very wealthy. He was living in Austria. Austria is taken over by the Nazis. He wants to stay in Austria because, let's face it, that was his home where he was living. He doesn't want to leave. The Nazis take over Austria, kind of a similar thing. People are telling him, hey, you should get the heck out of here. This is not going to turn out well. And kind of if you can kind of picture like a door closing. And so the door is closing in Austria for people to get out. And Freud's thinking about staying. A lot of people, when they talk about the Holocaust, they talk about it kind of like a storm. And they just thought if they could kind of ride out the storm, so to speak, they would be okay. But if you picture like a door closing in Austria for people to get out, and Freud's thinking that he wants to stay, and people are telling him, no, you should leave. And as the door is closing, right at the very last moment, he was able to get out. He was able to use his financial resources and his connections and stuff like that to escape. However, 4 of his sisters were not so fortunate. They were stuck there before the door slammed shut, and they ended up getting murdered by the Nazis. So I point this out to say, okay, Sigmund Freud, world famous, extremely wealthy, highly regarded. He couldn't get his 4 sisters out. If he couldn't get all of his family out, how would you expect just some kind of regular everyday person to be able to get out from the clutches of the Nazis? It wasn't that easy as far as we'll just run away or go hide or escape or something like that. This is the inside the museum. They've taken a lot of these photos and blown them up and then given descriptions on what you're looking at. So there's a lot of great photography on display. This is our tour just a few days before COVID shut everything down back in 2000. Here's a very striking photo. So this is a ghetto that the Nazis have set up. So what a ghetto was they would identify a certain part of a city as the Jewish section. They would enclose it, meaning people couldn't come or leave the section. And then they would make all the Jews stay in there. And this particular ghetto, what's happening here is, and oh, by the way, this was like one of the most, this was like one of the favorite Holocaust photographs of the architect of the museum. He actually talked about this in his book, how this inspired him. But anyway, what's going on here is this is a ghetto over here, and this is a ghetto here. This whole area is essentially a ghetto, but it just so happened that the rail trolley line that the Nazis and the non-Jewish people used went right through the middle of the ghetto. So the Nazis decided, well, we can't really reroute the trolley, Carl, that easy. But what we could do is we could put fencing and walls and stuff along the trolley line and prevent people from using it that way. And then if someone needs to get from one side of the ghetto to the other, we'll build this bridge and they can just walk from this side over here if they need to go over here. Now you'll notice there's guards all along the trolley because they were worried about Jews somehow getting on the trolley and escaping the ghetto. And so the architect, James Ingo Free, he talked about how bridges are usually used to connect people and bring them together. You know, he's an architect, and so he looks at the world in that kind of way. And this photo was really striking to him just because in this instance, a bridge is being used to help kind of keep people separated, to keep the Jews in the ghetto from interacting with the non-Jews. So really striking photo. And so in Warsaw, the largest city in Poland, the Jews are all confined to a ghetto there. So what happened there in other ghettos, if you were Jewish and once the ghetto was defined, you had to stay there and they would seal it off. If you weren't Jewish, you could still stay there, but you probably didn't want to. And then even Jews in the surrounding area, they would round up and force them to move there. So, you know, suppose you're Jewish, you're living in an area of Warsaw that's outside the ghetto, the Nazis would arrest you or deport you into the ghetto and make you stay there. It was kind of like this big giant prison complex. And so local German administrators referred to ghettos as Jewish residential quarters. They established two main types of ghetto, open and closed, a high brick wall separated closed ghettos, et cetera, et cetera. So interesting with that. I think a lot of people have heard of the Warsaw Ghetto. You may not realize how large it was. Here is a map of Warsaw. And, you know, we're not talking about a few blocks of real estate. This is a big area. And so here's map of Warsaw from 1940. And then if you zoom in, you can see here, so these are streets. And so this is a big area they sealed off, and kind of notice how it's not a square. It's interesting that Nazis needed whatever was in like this spot and this spot. So they didn't seal it off. But I think some people are surprised to know how big the Warsaw Ghetto really was. It wasn't just like a, you know, 3 or 4 blocks or 7 or 8 blocks. Look, it's massive. And these were all people being confined. Now, because the way this is an urban environment and it's closed off, all these people are dependent on the Nazis for their food, and the Nazis weren't bringing in much food. And so over time, a lot of these people die from starvation, diseases. They were having a hard time getting heat or any type of utilities. Medicine was almost non-existent. So there's kind of slowly but surely killing a lot of these people in the ghetto, and at the same time they're deporting them to other places. Now this is an object that I thought was really fascinating. This is a milk container. So back in the day when there was a lot of farming going on, you would put milk in here. And this is related to a series of documents known as the Ringelblum Archive. The Ringelblum Archive is a collection of documents from the World War II Warsaw Ghetto, collected and preserved by a group led by Jewish historian Dr. Manuel Ringelblum. The group, which included historians, writers, rabbis, and social workers, was dedicated to chronicling life in the ghetto during World War II. Let the world read and know. So this gentleman's vision, his thought was that, you know, we don't want the Nazis to be the only one telling the story about what's happening here in the ghetto. We should be documenting what's happening. We should be making journals and diaries and writing letters and keeping copies of official documents and making artwork that portrays what's taking place here. Now that's what he ends up doing. He puts this team of over 50 people together to kind of run this operation. Of course, it was very illegal, so they had to be very secretive. And so what they would do is they would take these like official documents and diaries and letters and photographs and stuff, and they would bury them in these containers like this. And so here's the gentleman right here, Ringelblum. And then what happened is there were over 50 people on his team. They're working in secret. And when the Holocaust was over with, all but 2 of the members were dead. So only 2 of the members of his group survived the Holocaust. And so a lot of this stuff, and then Warsaw is almost completely leveled during the war. And so they had a hard time finding any of the stuff that they buried because most of the members of the group were killed or because Warsaw was so devastated. But this is I think this was I can't remember if this was a church, I think. And one of the members of the group that survived, one of only 2, over 50 people, knew that there were some documents there. And so what they're doing here is they're taking it out of the ground. Now, there's a really great film that came out several years ago about this story, and I've seen a lot of films and movies and documentaries about the Holocaust. I saw this one, and it really, really moved me. It was really striking. Again, they were hiding all this stuff. So the reason why this object is important is because this was used to store documents in here. It was buried underground, and it just so happened it was found after the war and retrieved. So a really incredible story. And then the title of the film is called "Who Will Write Our History?" And there's a lot of Holocaust films out there and documents, but this one, like I said, it really, really struck me. And I don't think a lot of people know about this film. You can find it on the internet. You probably have to pay a few dollars for it, but I wanted to play a clip from it just because, number one, it does a good job of telling the story of this gentleman, Ringelblum, and his team, and all the great work. A lot of the stuff, a lot of the information we have about what went on during the Warsaw Ghetto era was because of this guy and his team preserving these records. If it wasn't for him, we would only have the Nazi perspective, so to speak. So let me play a clip from this film. Number one, so you can just be aware of this movie. It's really excellent. Number two, so you can know more about this story, which is really not all that well known, or at least not as well known as it should be. And so let's watch this short 2-minute clip.
Somewhere, years ago, there was a mother who knew that her son was the cleverest, the most talented, the most beautiful. And now the brightest and most beautiful child in the world lies in a strange street. And his name isn't even known.
We should have seen the worst coming. But we did not want to know the truth. We did not want to see it.
Does the world know about our suffering?
Emanuel Ringelblum understood that he had a story to tell, and it was the most important story he would ever have to tell.
Almost all the photography that we have was taken by the German propaganda unit.
Will the Germans write our history, or will we write our history?
Let the witness be our writing.
Their goal was to write the history of the war from the Jewish perspective. And there was no time to lose.
The worst scenario was in the process of happening.
Writing becomes the only recourse. That was the ultimate act of defiance.
You don't really need guns to fight. You could fight with paper and pen.
This is what made this collection of documents so absolutely unique.
One thing is clear to all of us. Our devotion and constant terror have not been in vain.
Among those taken away was Rabbi Uberman,
Geli 16,
Israel Lichtenstein,
Lade Golden,
Abraham Levin,
Halina.
Emanuel Ringelblum.
Remember, my name is Nahum Gazivich.
I am writing this as a witness.
Okay, so really great film. If you get a chance to check it out, Who Will Write Our History? It's in kind of like the docudrama format, and boy, it really feels like you're back there in the Warsaw Ghetto with these people. And when this film was over with, I was really amazed and impressed. It was really moving. And I've seen a lot of films on the Holocaust. But anyway, this was one of the containers that they used to store the documents in, and keeping records to tell their side of the story, what was going on, and the fact that this is associated with him and it's now on display at the museum, pretty incredible. And again, only 2 people of his team of over 50 survived the Holocaust. And this particular section of the museum has information related to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which after a while, the Jews that were in the ghetto realized that their fate is not a good one, because people slowly over time, people are either dying of starvation or disease, or the Nazis start liquidating the ghetto by deporting people. And the people that are left behind are like, well, gee, these people get sent away from here and we never hear from them again. So there must not be good things happening wherever these people are being taken to. They're sent to place all these different concentration camps. So eventually they rise up to try and fight the Nazis, and they fought very valiantly, but they were just facing unbeatable odds, and the Nazis were able to eventually overpower them and put down the ghetto uprising, and then essentially just flatten that part of the city. So this is another really striking photo that's got an incredible story behind it. So you might have seen this before. It's one of the more famous pictures of the Holocaust. And so what's happening here is there's a Catholic priest who's about to be executed by the Nazis. So he's not a Jewish priest. He's a Catholic priest, but he's Polish. And in the eyes of the Nazis, the Poles were inferior people. And so they oftentimes found themselves being targeted as well. And so here is a picture of the gentleman from earlier days. During the German invasion of Poland, the Nazis sought to destroy Polish culture and enslave the Polish people by targeting those in leadership positions, including priests. So anyone that was in a leadership position, whether you were a government leader, educational leader, a religious leader, a medical leader, anyone that was in the leadership class, the Nazi targeted for elimination, because they wanted to enslave essentially the Polish people, and they theorized that they can do that easier if the country is without leaders. The SS entered his town in October of 1939, rounded up a group of approximately 45 men and marched them to a nearby forest. Father Sosnowski, a Catholic priest, was permitted to administer last rites to the doomed men. Then they were all executed, himself included. And so here is that picture. So this had been going on during the day. And so you can see these are dead bodies back here. So they've already brought at least one other group here and executed all of them in the forest. And then now they brought this next group of 45 people approximately to the forest, and now they're about to be executed. And as the caption said, he was able to administer the last rites before that happens. But a lot of the photos of the Holocaust were taken after the camps were liberated. There's quite a few that are from the actual Holocaust itself, and usually taken by the Nazis, as they mentioned in that film. But I mean, just an incredible photo. Not sure who took this picture or the whole story behind it, but essentially the Nazis are about to execute this guy. He knows his fate because these are all dead bodies back here. And so look at how strong and poised he is standing there. And then there's these other people over here. They obviously know their fate as well. And so just a really incredible photograph. And so I point this out to say, of course, not all the victims of the Holocaust were Jews. This gentleman was not Jewish, and he was executed by the Nazis, and very early on during the invasion of Poland, just because he was a religious leader. And so again, more information on him. All right, so the Nazis start deporting people, and they're using trains to transport these people usually to these concentration camps. This is a famous photo of people being deported from their homes to Auschwitz, where their fate will probably not be a good one. And let's talk about Anne Frank. So I have a separate program that I do on Anne Frank, so I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about her because I do that in the other program, but essentially, suffice to say, Anne Frank, born June 12th, 1929, and she died in February of 1945. And of course, Anne made famous by the diary that she wrote that later became books and films. And there's a picture of young Anne. And at the Holocaust Museum, in DC, they have an exhibit on Anne Frank. Now, the way the museum exhibit is configured, it's really easy to walk past this. The first time I came to the museum looking specifically for this, I actually missed it. And I had to go downstairs and ask them where it was at. And they said, oh, yeah, it's kind of hard to walk by because it's, So if you're really interested in Anne Frank, or if you're visiting the museum with someone who is, make sure you understand exactly where the Anne Frank exhibit section is, because it would be easy to miss it. So FYI on that, and some information that talks about her. So her diary, if I know a lot of people read it when they were kids. If you get a chance and you haven't read it in a long time, or if you've never read it before, you really should read it. It's a really striking book. And I wanted to include this caption from her diary, because this particular section talks about kind of the fear that she has and the harassment the Jews are receiving. She says, our freedom was severely restricted. This is before she went into hiding. She's talking about that era. She says, our freedom was severely restricted by a series of anti-Jewish decrees. Jews were required to wear a yellow star. Jews were required to turn in their bicycles. Jews were forbidden to use streetcars. Jews were forbidden to ride in cars, even their own. Jews were required to do their shopping between 3 and 5 p.m. Jews were forbidden to be out on the streets between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Jews were forbidden to attend theaters, movies, or take part in any athletic activity in public. So this is Anne talking about the persecution that the Jews are receiving from the Nazis. And you can see it's pretty intense. It's pretty all-encompassing. You'll notice she doesn't mention anything about gas chambers and death camps and stuff like that, because that hadn't really gotten started on a large extent. And then also that information had not gotten leaked out, so to speak. And again, I don't want to diminish Anne's story because she was a remarkable person, but I have a whole separate program I do on Anne Frank. And so I'll save a lot of the information on her. That it's called Anne Frank's Europe, before, during, and after her diary. So I talk about her life before she wrote the diary. Then I talk about what was going on with her and her family during the time she wrote the diary, and then also to what happened to her after she stopped writing the diary when she was arrested by the Nazis. You can be on the lookout for that. Now, Patty was kind enough to give me the heads up that this film was coming out from National Geographic about one of the women who helped keep Anne Frank and her family in hiding. And it's called Risk. Everything was like the subtitle, but the new series is called A Small Light. And so I've seen the first segment of this, and it's really outstanding. If you get a chance, you should check it out. But I thought I'd play a short clip from it, and then I'll go to Patty and see what her thoughts are on this one. So here is a clip of A Small Light. And it's a story of one of the women who helped keep Anne Frank and her family hiding. Meep.
All right, listen to me. You can't go back. You can't run. And you can't show any fear. Let's do this.
I hear they're cracking down on the Jews. That must be scary.
We have to hide our allegiances, brother. We're not gonna make it.
Meep, what I'm asking you to do is dangerous. If you get caught, you could get arrested, or even worse. I need your help hiding my family. You need to take your time to think it through.
No, I don't. What do I do? Can I help you?
Tell me where I can find Otto Frank.
So you're going to tell me?
He's my boss and my friend. What would you have me do when Mr. Frank asked? Say no!
Ask me.
I didn't think I had to consult you before deciding to save a person's life.
People have lost everything, and still they resist. And I have to resist too.
We're going to start a fire.
I need to remember that things were good so I can believe that they'll be good when this is over.
We have to choose when we fight them. We don't let them choose for us.
My only job is to protect my family.
Did you hear that? The Queen wants my diary. And I can't wait to see it.
Dude.
Get down!
Your heads.
We can't save everyone. But if I don't try, I don't think I'll be able to live with myself. Turn darkness into...
Okay, so as I mentioned, I saw the segment, the first segment that was really, really good. So if you get a chance to check out, I guess the only thing I didn't like, I'm not really crazy about the rock and roll music type of background stuff, but I guess that's for the younger audience, so to speak. But anyway, Patty, thanks so much for telling me about this. You were the first one to give me the heads up on this. And have you gotten a chance to see this yet, or anything that you want to add about this one for people that want to go look at it?
I did get to see those first two. I'm not that smart about streaming, so I just sort of go with the flow. But I thought it was very well done. And I also saw, I think it was The Atlantic, but maybe WAPO had an actual interview with both Belle Powley, who plays Miep Gies, and Liev Schreiber. And they talked about how deeply it affected them, and the whole focus being about always trying to find new ways to tell the story, because sometimes these stories become we're so used to these same stories from the same perspective, like the diary, say, for example, that there's some people who feel like maybe it just becomes part of the wallpaper and we stop connecting with it emotionally. So this was seen as a way, the people who wrote the script saw it as a way to move people into it from a completely different perspective. And I assume, Robert, that's part of the choice in music. They also wanted to appeal to younger people, because history gets lost very easily, right? And part of Liev Schreiber, he actually said he wasn't that interested in working. He was having a good time with his kids based on the pandemic. But his family comes from Ukraine, and he was very involved with trying to help with the situation in Ukraine. And he saw this as another way of, telling that same story, because it's a similar type of thing, trying to wipe out a people and erase an identity. And we saw that last week in The Rape of Europa, right? Trying to stamp out a culture.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, you bring up a really good point. We're so kind of familiar with the Anne Frank story that you can get, I don't know what the word is, but
you know what I mean? But like by becoming part of the wallpaper, it's like, oh, I know that, but do we know that? You know what I mean? It's like not part of your everyday awareness of how to live life.
Well, yeah, like this woman, I mean, she risked her life to try and save Anne Frank and her family. And how many of us have ever been in a situation where we had to risk our lives for something? So that's really incredible. And then I thought the film really does a good job of making you feel like you're actually there during that time. It really, the setting of it's really, I thought was really impactful.
Quite agreed. I mean, she has a friend, Miep has a friend whose attitude toward everything that's going on is so callous, and you can sort of see the effect that has on Miep. Like, it's just sort of, there's one point where there was a hangout they like to go to, and it turned out it was closed, and it was this friend just says, oh, well, he was so stupid. He kept serving ice cream cones to Jews, so they shot him. It's like, oh, of course. Yeah. But so there's those kinds of juxtapositions that kind of grab you all over again. And another point that was made that I had not known before, I don't know if anybody else did, but Miep Gies was actually adopted from a very poor single mother in Vienna to this family to the Gies family or I'm not even sure if their name was Gies actually, in Amsterdam. So she had a sense of what it was like to have been displaced. When she met the Franks, they were just being displaced into Amsterdam from Germany.
Oh yeah, no, she really has an incredible story. She actually wrote a book. If you get a chance, you should also read that book too. But yeah, her personal story is really incredible.
Yeah, it just is, like I say, and again, because we have talked so much about this, we all have this concern that this is being forgotten, no matter how many times we say never forget. So, I mean, I'm for anything that, grabs people by the lapels and says, listen, pay attention. And I think that so far what I've seen, only the first 2 episodes, but so far what I've seen, it's doing a pretty good job at that. Yeah, I think.
Oh yeah, no, I'd agree. So not exactly related to the museum. Just wanted to point this out to make sure people were aware of this. So go check that out if you get a chance. All right, so let's continue on with the museum exhibits. This is another striking photo. So I was talking before about some of the photos are disturbing, but the really graphic ones are somewhat hidden. So like, for instance, there's this wall here. It might be hard to tell from the photo, but this is like a half wall. And on the other side of this wall, if you look down, there's more graphic photos. But again, the kind of most graphic stuff is somewhat hidden, or there'll be like a room with a video and say, oh, this video may be disturbing to people. This video is very shocking as well, kind of sort of similar to the one we saw, the Catholic priest. So this is a Jewish gentleman, and he's about to be executed by a Nazi as well. You can see there's a pit here with a bunch of dead bodies. So he obviously knows what his fate is. Now, again, that kind of thought of, well, why did people not just get away from Hitler? Well, this guy that was executed, we don't know his name. Unfortunately, we don't actually know a lot about the photo, and I'll explain why in a moment. But the photo was taken in a place called Vinnytsia, which is actually in Ukraine, and it's over 800 miles from Berlin. So, before World War II broke out, this guy probably doesn't really have any concerns about Hitler, but because of the war and the Nazis invading Eastern Europe, all of a sudden it lands up on his doorstep, so to speak. So here it is. This is Vinnytsia, Ukraine. This photo, there's not a lot known about it. It's usually titled "The Last Jew in Vinnytsia." Was taken in September of 1941, a haunting and well-known photograph. This is one of the most famous photographs of the Holocaust, taken during the Holocaust, of a Jewish man, one of thousands killed in Vinnytsia by Nazi mobile killing squads. The neutral expression of the shooter is very striking. None of the 15 onlookers, some of whom are teenagers, are turning away from this taking place. The title refers to the caption written on the back of the photograph. So that's why this photo is called that, because when it was discovered, that caption was written on the back of this photo. It was obtained by United Press International from a Holocaust survivor during the 1961 trial of Adolf Eichmann. The person who had the photo in his possession said that he obtained it from a Nazi soldier. And there it is. And so here is the man, again, looking very poised. He obviously knows his fate. And then what we're referring to, look at the young boys here. I mean, these are members of the Hitler Youth. They're teenagers, and they're watching this murder take place. So just a really profound and striking photo for a number of reasons. And again, we don't know this man's identity, unfortunately. So that's the story behind that. And I would tell you more about this photo, but that's essentially really all we know about it. They've done some research, and they know that, yeah, the Nazis came in this area in September 1941 and liquidated all the Jews, and et cetera, et cetera. This is one of the more moving portions of the museum. This is called the Tower of Faces. It's also one of the most well-known sections of the museum. It's over 1,000 photos of Jews that were taken between 1890 and 1941 in Lithuania. So in 1941, before the Nazis invaded Lithuania, there were 4,000 Jews living there. Today, there are 0, and that's because the Nazis came in September of 1941 and liquidated everyone, murdered everyone that was Jewish there. And so before that happened, though, that one family lived there, they were in the photography business. And so they took portraits of different people, all different ages and social classes and stuff like that, young and old, rich, poor, etc., men, women. And some of the photos survived through different means or others. And then they're now on display at the Holocaust Museum. Now, this is a 2-story exhibit. So this is actually down below. Initially, when you're walking through, you're up here. And then this is down below. You can actually walk up and look and see the people up close in person. But it's just this wall of all these faces. Again, the Tower of Faces is the name of this, and it's over 1,000 photographs. And so to look at these people and having them stare back at you and know that the Nazis came through here and murdered all these people, and then to have them looking at you really is very striking. It really kind of personalizes the story, so to speak. And then usually if a famous visitor comes to the museum, like President of the United States or First Lady, they'll get their picture taken in this particular section because, again, it's one of the more well-known spots in the museum. And again, so there's all these different, some of these portraits are very formal. Some are very informal. There's men, women, young people, older people, people working, people at play, rich people, poor people. It just goes to show you that the Nazi wrath of death knew no bounds. And then again, the people being deported by trains. This plays a key role in the Nazis exterminating people. They had the killing squads where they would travel around Eastern Europe, round up all the Jews and kill them. But they decided that was not efficient enough. And so they thought a more efficient process was, instead of sending the killers, let me go back for a minute. Initially in, say, Eastern Europe, the Nazis are sending out these mobile death squads where they would go into these areas, they'd round up all the Jews, and they'd kill them. They thought that this was effective, but it wasn't as efficient as it could be. So they changed their strategy. And instead of having these mobile killing squads, they expanded the concentration camp and death camp infrastructure, so to speak. So instead of sending the killers to the victims, the Nazis changed their strategy, and they're now going to bring the victims to the killers. And so then you have this great expansion of the concentration camp system. And the reason that people were able to be murdered at these camps is because the Nazis usually put them on trains and shipped them. They actually have a rail car display at the Holocaust Museum. This is also one of the kind of highlights of the museum, or key things to see. What's happening here is that this is a rail car. The Nazis would cram a bunch of people in the car, close the door. This is a guard tower here, so there'd usually be 1 or 2 guards stationed in here to kind of keep an eye on the rail cars to make sure no one tried to escape or do anything like that. Now, if you've seen Holocaust movies moving forward, you should kind of be on the lookout for scenes that have trains in them, because trains are really important in the Holocaust story, and they frequently make appearances in Holocaust films. Like, so for instance, in Schindler's List, Oskar Schindler in the film, he's this guy and he's living a really good life. And then eventually, though, he starts helping the Jews and saving them. And one of the turning points in the film, though, is when he sees this rail car. So it's really like a defining moment in the film. If you watch it again, you should be on the lookout for this scene, because it's really kind of one of the first times where he starts showing empathy for the Jews. And they're trapped. The people are trapped in this car. It's really hot out. there's no air conditioning. The only ventilation is a small window here. And so in the film, he asks them to hose down the car with a hose to give the people some water or some type of relief. And there's another scene that involves trains in the film, The Pianist. So in this film, the lead character, he's being rounded up with his family and other members of the community, and they're about to be put on the train. At the last possible moment, a guy that he knew that was now a Nazi told him, "Don't get on that train." And for a minute, he's kind of bewildered, like, "Oh, what am I supposed to do? The Nazis are telling me to get on the train. All my friends and family are getting on the train." The guy's like, "Listen, don't get on the train." And so he doesn't, and he escapes, and then he ends up surviving the war. But suffice to say, the train sent all the people to their deaths. And so they have one on display at the Holocaust Museum. It's very large. So they had to actually put it in place and install it while the museum was being built. Here's the Washington Monument, of course, in the background. And so here it is being lowered into place. So they put this in the museum and then built the rest of the structure around it because it would be hard to get it through. It's right in the center of the museum, and it's up on the top floor. So it'd be hard to get it in the building now. So they did it that way. But, you know, here it is. And so you see these cars and think of the importance that they had in terms of the Holocaust. And this artifact is an important object in the museum collection because it signifies the fact that you're halfway through the exhibit. So it's a good kind of like, you know, it's like the 50-yard line in football, so to speak, to make light of like a sports analogy. So when you get to this point, you're at the halfway point of the exhibit, which is kind of helpful if you're trying to, you know, pace yourself or things like that. And then here's the placard next to the car. Most deported Jews endured a torturous train journey to death camps in bare freight cars under conditions of hunger and thirst, extreme overcrowding, and horrible sanitation. In the winter, they were exposed to freezing temperature because, of course, the cars had no heat. In the summer, they were enveloped in suffocating heat and stench because there was no restroom facilities or air conditioning. Many of those deported, especially elderly people and young children, died during the journey. So I don't think people maybe fully realize how many people actually died in these rail cars. We just kind of think of, oh, deaths occurring in concentration camps or ghettos, but these cars killed a lot of people, particularly if they were older, younger, or any type of health issues. And so then to go inside the car and just kind of try and put yourself in the position of people that would have been trapped in these things is very profound as well. So make sure you see that. And there's not a lot of photos of the Holocaust. I mean, there's a fair amount of photos from the Holocaust that were taken by the Nazis during the time the Holocaust was taken. The majority of the photos, though, of the Holocaust were taken after the camps were liberated. But here is a photo that was taken by the Nazis at Auschwitz. And then this is a photo of Auschwitz in more recent times. This is the actual sign over the camp entrance. It says, "Work shall set you free." Now, most of the objects that are in the Holocaust Museum are original artifacts. This is one of the few that's not. So this is not the actual sign that hung over at Auschwitz. But what they did is they took the original sign and they made a casting of it, and then they put it on display. So again, this is one of the few objects in the permanent collection that's not an original Holocaust artifact, but it's like the next best thing. It's a casting of the original sign. And so this is people being deported to Auschwitz. So these people, many of them, this is right when the train would have pulled up. And many of these people within moments would be dead from being gassed. But of course, they don't know that that's their fate at this point in time because they're being told they're just being resettled. This is a famous photo. So yeah, here's a group of people. They've been brought here by train. They're about to go through the selection process. Some of these people will potentially live. Many of them will be gassed, but they don't know that. So they're just kind of standing here very nonchalantly because they're kind of trying to process what's taking place. And then at the museum, they have a mock-up of the gas chambers at Auschwitz. And so this is also a very kind of a highlight of the museum collection, so to speak. And it's very interesting to look at this and see how this worked. So these are the sculpture of people, and they're showing up, and they don't know what's going on. They're just being told they're needing to come here, and they're transported by train, and here they are showing up. And then they're crammed inside they're told to get undressed because they have to take a shower, and they're crammed inside the shower. The door is locked shut, and they're gassed and killed. And then the bodies are removed by other prisoners, so that the Nazis don't do this dirty work themselves. They make other prisoners remove these bodies and process them. And you might be thinking, why would they do that? That's terrible. Well, if they didn't do it, they themselves would be killed. So it was a way to try and stay alive. And then they would put the bodies in these ovens and cremate them. Oops. And yeah, so all that's depicted here in this model of the shower. So the people come in here, and then the showers were underground, partially to hide them, then partially to muffle the sound. And then this is the crematoria over here. So interesting to see how this was actually physically set up, because people have heard about it so much. I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about Auschwitz because, again, we do this whole separate program about Auschwitz. It's not on the calendar, but we do it on a regular basis. So it'll be scheduled again at some point in time in the near future. So be on the lookout for that. And then I wanted to mention this film because people would not always, but oftentimes bring up this film when I was doing my in-person tours of the Auschwitz gas chamber. So people would say, oh, have you seen The Boy in the Striped Pajamas? Or for one reason or another, this film would come up. And it's kind of it's a very controversial film, because on the one hand, it's a very interesting storyline. It's very tragic. On the other hand, it's a fictitious story. So the people that have issues with it, it centers around the fact that there's a boy who his father is the Nazi camp commandant. He befriends a Jewish prisoner, and people get really upset that the fact that would never really happen in real life, which I understand. But the reason I wanted to point out is because the scene at the ending, the two boys end up in the gas chamber. It's kind of a long story how that ends up taking place, but anyway, they do. And so this film, in my opinion, does a really good job of kind of showing what it would be like to be in the gas chamber before the death took place. So The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, again, it's a very well-known film. It's very controversial. If you've seen this film and you hate it, I understand. If you've seen this film and you love it, I understand that too. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But the only reason I bring it up is because whenever we would go to the tour of the Auschwitz section of the Holocaust Museum, inevitably someone in the group would mention The Boy in the Striped Pajamas scene. And so I just wanted to include that as well. So FYI for that. All right. Now, some of the prisoners that were being held in these camps were not necessarily just idling their time. A lot of them were used as slave laborers. So this is actually a BMW airplane engine manufacturing plant. And you'll notice the prisoners here, or the workers, are Jewish prisoners. You can tell that because they have the striped uniforms on. So what's happening here is these Jewish prisoners are being forced to build these German airplane engines. Now, again, you might be wondering, well, why would they do that? That sounds counterproductive. Well, they had to, because if they didn't do this work, they would be killed immediately, as opposed to trying to do this work and keep themselves alive. And so, yeah, they worked as slowly as possible, and they tried to sabotage the work. But this is a big kind of moral dilemma. And so we would talk about this during our tour, like, the guilt that people would have of, on the one hand, they're supporting the Nazi war effort, on the other hand, they keep themselves alive. And, what would you do? It's impossible for any of us to know because we're not in that situation, but it's a interesting moral dilemma that they can talk about. This is a barracks. And so imagine sharing these bunk beds with a bunch of people. I think now, since COVID, we're more aware and cognizant of diseases and illnesses and contagiousness and stuff like that. But the way people would sleep, but just lining up as many people as possible crammed in these bunks. There's no mattresses. There's no pillows or sheets. Maybe they might have a blanket, maybe, and just all these people crammed in here. So disease actually kills a lot of people in the concentration camp system. Yeah, a lot died by gas chambers, but a lot died from diseases. This is a famous photo. This is a good example. This photo is one of the most famous photos of the Holocaust. It was not taken while the camp was still being operated. It was taken after it was liberated. But the importance of the photo is it shows these people all crammed in here. So I mean, imagine having to live and sleep like this with a bunch of other people in close proximity. If any person here is sick, which chances are a lot of them are, the sickness is going to spread very quickly. And so disease ends up killing a lot of people during the Holocaust, just kind of also kind of sort of similar to how during the American Civil War, a lot of the soldiers died of diseases as opposed to being killed in battle. A little bit similar, but not exactly. So anyway, they have this barracks. So this barracks was actually at Auschwitz. It was actually used there. So people at Auschwitz actually slept on this very exact same barrack during the time the camp was in operation. Now it's at the Holocaust Museum. And then here it is. And so just can't imagine sleeping on this with a bunch of other people in close proximity, but that was the only option. And then here's a cart on display. And so when I saw this, I immediately remembered the scene from Schindler's List that features a cart like this. So these were used to haul things, in particular bodies. And so if you remember the scene from Schindler's List, there's the girl with the red coat, and she's traveling about. And this is kind of important scene in the film because this is also like a real turning point for the Oscar Schindler character at this point in time in the film. But anyway, the girl with the red coat, she's kind of trying to keep alive, and then eventually she doesn't make it, and you realize that because she ends up on this cart, and you can see they're transporting their body. So the fact that they have one of these carts on display and thinking that, gosh, this was used to move dead bodies during the Holocaust, and now it's on display at the museum. And again, it kind of reminded me of this scene from Schindler's List because I remembered this scene where they were moving her body in the cart. And then this is one of the more well-known areas of the museum's permanent collection. This is the shoes exhibit. So these were shoes that were taken from people at Auschwitz. So when people show up, they had to give up all their possessions, all their clothes, all their money, any photographs, mementos. They had everything. People had to give up everything that they had, including their clothes and their shoes. And if they were lucky, they would be given some other type of shoes. But so these were shoes of people that probably were all killed in the gas chamber. And this really kind of personalizes the story of the Holocaust on a very intimate way. And so there's all different types of shoes: men's shoes, women's shoes, large, small, fancy shoes, work shoes. They all are, a lot of them are brown, some of it because that was a style back then, also because partially some have faded over time because they're leather. But you can see, like, here's a red one, creamish color, and they're just kind of thrown in this heap. And then this is called the 4,000 shoes exhibit. And then this quote and the next one on the next slide are from a member of the museum staff. In general, the shoes are objects that leave the most profound impression on the visitors. It shows the magnitude of the Nazi murder through something so deeply personal. And then the gentleman went on to say, these two quotes are from a curator at the museum. Some of the shoes are very elegant, and the variety of shoes gives the sense of the deception at work to fool the victim. So, I mean, think about it. People showing up here wearing very fancy shoes sometimes. Well, they didn't know what their fate was about to be. Jews were told they would be building new lives when they were being deported someplace in the East, not told they were being sent to be killed. And so you have all these shoes and people putting these on and then being deported and then murdered. And then this section, so we're getting kind of like in the tail end of the permanent exhibit. This section, so after the Jews were killed and other people killed in the gas chambers, they had to dispose of their bodies. So that's what's happening here. This was a table that has a drain in it, and so that any bodily fluids would filter down the drain. But even after the people were killed, the Nazis were still stealing from them, because they would murder the people and they would cut their hair off if they still had any, and they would take out any gold fillings they might have. So even after the people are murdered, the Nazis are still stealing from them by taking anything of value from their bodies that they could. And they're put in the crematoria and burned. There was a interesting letter that the museum had on display. This was a few years ago. There was a gentleman that worked for one of the companies that made these ovens, and he got a request from the Nazis saying, yeah, listen, we're using these ovens like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the ovens aren't strong enough to accommodate that. The doors keep blowing open from the too much gas and heat. And so you need to make them stronger so that we can run these ovens and burn these bodies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the guy at the company was like, oh yeah, no problem. We can take care of that. So kind of showing the, how the business people were also in cahoots with the Nazis and complicit in this as well. And then I like this section of the museum. It talks about people rising up and resisting the Nazis. And so this is good to see. This is a group called the White Rose. These were a group of German college students who were opposed to the persecution of the Nazis, and they were trying to raise awareness of or they were opposed to the Nazi persecution of the Jews, sorry. They were trying to raise awareness of persecution, and this is a picture of them here. It was a woman, her brother, and a friend. They were the leaders of this group called the White Rose. And so they're sympathetic to the Jews. Not all Germans were in favor of the persecution of the Jews, of course. And so these three weren't, and they were trying to raise awareness of the issue. They were having to do so in secret. But unfortunately, you can see actually over here, there's actually a Nazi guy right here. So they have to do so in secret. But eventually they were captured and they were executed. And there's a film that came out several years ago about them, which is pretty good. And then this is interesting. This is in Denmark. This is a boat that was used to take people to freedom from the clutches of the Nazis. And so I have a short video that talks about this boat. So let's cue that up. So one of the things I like about this museum is within all the tragedy of the murder and persecution and the death are these aspects or facets of hope and courage and strength and resilience. And when you see a boat like this, wow, this boat rescued people. And then those people ended up having children and grandchildren, and et cetera, et cetera. Just really incredible to see something like this up close in person and think about, gosh, the courage that would have been taken to operate something like this and rescue people and save their lives. This is a photo of a gentleman. He's a Polish partisan, and partisan means a military person who's not in the formal army, but he's a partisan, and what he's doing is he's laying explosives on this rail track. And then when the train comes through here, it'll be detonated and exploding. Really courageous of him, not only to do this work, but to have his photograph taken, because if he would have been captured, he of course would have been killed. And then this is towards the very end of the exhibit. This is a famous quote you may have heard before, talking about persecution of people. First, they came for the this is talking about the Nazis, of course. First, they came for the socialites, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And then again, within all of this death and destruction are these kind of glimmers of hope, so to speak. And so this is a touching story. This is a couple that were in Europe during World War II, and they survived the Holocaust. And so the young woman wants to get married, but right after the Holocaust ends, right after the war ends, but there's no way for her to do so because they don't have any money, they don't have a dress, anything like that. So she comes in through bartering, I think it was, if not mistaken, she comes into possession of a parachute. And so she ends up having her wedding dress made out of this parachute. So really great love story. It kind of shows the innovativeness of some people and their determination. A wedding dress that made history, a glimmer of joy in the displaced persons camp. This wedding dress was made from a parachute and worn by Lily Latz for her wedding to Ludwig Friedman in a displaced persons camp. Ludwig had promised to find fabric for a white gown and purchased an old parachute for this purpose. Lily hired a seamstress to make the dress in exchange for her cigarette ration. Other brides in the Selly and Belsen displaced persons camp subsequently wore the dress. Lily and Ludwig immigrated to the United States in 1948. So how about that? Using your bartering skills to acquire an old parachute and then also to have it sewn into a dress, and then you can get married. And there it is. And then again, some of the more fascinating objects of the exhibit are these kind of personal mementos. And so the museum really serves as an archive of all different types of Holocaust related items. And so this is a short video talking about some love letters that I thought this was a cool story. So we just want to include love in our programs whenever we can. So you might not have thought that love letters would make it into the Holocaust tour today, but we thought we'd squeeze it in for you. All right, a very touching story. So let's see. So that's the permanent exhibit. We are running a little behind on time, but sometimes this program takes a little bit longer just because of the content. But we're in the home stretch, so I just want to explain or talk about a few other things that are in the museum beyond the permanent exhibit. They have a cafe, a small cafe. So if you're going to be spending a amount of time here and need to take a break, recommend checking that out. There's also a children's exhibit. It's called Remember the Children, Daniel's Story. So if you have a young person in your life that you want to learn more about the Holocaust, you can take them to this exhibit. So a little more, say, milder content and maybe easier to process. Remember the Children, Daniel's Story is the museum's primary exhibition program for young people and their families. The exhibition tells the story of one family's experiences during the Holocaust from the perspective of a boy growing up in Nazi Germany. So you can be aware of that. I've been to this exhibit myself, even though I don't have any children and I'm an adult, but it's very well done. This is the temporary exhibit, really well done as well, called Americans in the Holocaust. What did Americans know? What more could have been done? I'll just go through this pretty quickly. At some point in time, maybe do a separate program on this topic. It's so fascinating. So this is really going back to that, what information was being processed here in America related to the Holocaust. The Nazis were in the news a lot in the time leading up to and during World War II. Like, for instance, look at these Time magazine covers of Hitler. So it's not like he was an unknown, obscure figure. He made a lot of press in the US and other places. And this is a spoof of Hitler. So even back then, people were thinking that he was an unusual individual. So again, just because of time, we don't have the ability to go through this exhibit in kind of great detail. I just kind of wanted to make you more aware of it. I did want to highlight a few things about it though, which I'll do in just a minute. So this is interesting. So again, there's a whole kind of I don't know what you call it, Monday morning quarterbacking, or hindsight's 2020. Why didn't we do more for the Jews and things like that? Well, that's just people didn't want to back then. So this is in November of 1938. These are public opinion polls taken in the United States. So here's a public opinion poll by the American Institute of Public Opinion, which is a highly regarded institution. And this is from back in November 1938. Do you approve or disapprove of Nazi treatment of Jews in Germany? Look, 94% disapprove. I'm amazed that 6% would actually admit that they did approve of the way Nazis were treating Jews, but that's beside itself. Should we allow a larger number of Jewish exiles from Germany to come to the United States to live? And again, this is in November 1938. Look, 71% of the people say no, and then 8% of the people have no opinion. So, we're a democracy here in the United States, and usually the majority rules. And at that point in time, even though 94% of the people said that they disapproved of the way the Jews are being treated by the Nazis, 71% also said that they did not want any more Jews to come here. So kind of like it's their own problem. And then here's another interesting poll by the same group, American Institute of Public Opinion. This is from May 1940, public opinion poll on entering World War II. A poll conducted 1 week after Nazi Germany invaded Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, which back then and now are among our strongest allies for the United States, showed the Americans overwhelmingly opposed entering World War II. Do you think the United States should declare war on Germany and send our Army and Navy abroad to fight? Again, this is May 1940, after the Nazis had invaded Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. But yet 93% of the people said that we shouldn't end the war. Now, I'm not saying they should have said yes or no. That's each person's individual opinion, but I'm just showing you this slide to show that how strongly people were opposed to the United States entering the war. during May of 1940. This is an area of the museum for reflection and contemplation. You can go here and light candles in memory and say moments of prayer and things like that. A lot of dignitaries, when they visit the museum, whether it's Melania Trump or Barack Obama, stop and pay a visit here. The museum has a fabulous bookstore, this really incredible selection of books and other educational items on the Holocaust. So if you get a chance, make sure you check that out. People oftentimes ask me if I have any books I recommend about the Holocaust, and two of my favorites were actually published by the Holocaust Museum itself. The one on the left, if you want to take a picture of this or a screenshot with your phone, you're more than welcome to. But one of the books I recommend is called Tell Them We Remember, the story of the Holocaust, and the other one is called The World Must Know, the history of the Holocaust is told in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. So I have both these books. They're both published by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and they're both excellent. This gentleman was a friend of mine, the local Washington, D.C. based author, Anthony Pitch, and he wrote also an excellent book about the Holocaust called Our Crime Was Being Jewish. Hundreds of Holocaust survivors tell their story. Unfortunately, Mr. Pitch passed away a few years ago. The museum has a lot of public programs, both in person and online. So I used to live in Washington, D.C. One thing I used to like to do is about once a month, they would have like a lecture, a free lecture series that you could attend. And on all these different topics, like for instance, this one was how did ordinary citizens become murderers, was one. And then you can see me way back here in the blue shirt, I think. But anyway, in Washington, D.C., if you live there, they have these public programs that are free and all different types of really fascinating topics. This one was really noteworthy. It was called The Architecture of the Holocaust. And this gentleman was talking all about the Nazi architecture and kind of what they were looking for and trying to accomplish and stuff like that. So anyway, if you're in Washington, D.C., you should be aware of these programs because they're usually readily available. I think they have them like once a month. And if you go to the Holocaust Museum's website, they actually have a list of events that are taking place. So for instance, the next one, I won't be there myself, unfortunately, but it takes place on May 8th. And you can see it's a lecture on Jewish refugees in Iran and India. And you'll notice that the event will be live streamed, and it's also in Washington, D.C. So you can attend online or in person. So if you're in D.C., the next in-person lecture they're going to have, which is free, will be on May 8th, the evening of May 8th. So you can check that out. You'll notice that these other programs will be live streamed. So if you're not in the Washington, D.C. area, or if you're not able to get free, if you just want to stay home, you can check those out as well. And then a program that I did in 2019, I think it was, I went to a teacher or educators conference at the Holocaust Museum. I think it was like 2 or 3 days, and they're having another one that's coming up. So if you know someone who's an educator or you're an educator yourself, you might want to check this out and get more information. It's called the 2023 Arthur and Rochelle Belfer National Conference for Educators. And the one that I went to a few years ago was actually in person at the Holocaust Museum itself. This one is a live stream. So if you want to check that out, you're more than welcome to. It's June 26th through 28th. It's free and it's a live stream. So you can watch it from anywhere in the world. And designed to support accurate, meaningful teaching about the Holocaust, the Belfer National Conference for Educators is the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's flagship event for secondary school educators across the country. This free virtual conference invites participants to engage with current historical research and instructional best practices. Educators discover and learn how to use various classroom resources, find inspiration and new ideas, and connect with peers engaged in similar work. So when I went to this a few years ago, I met a lot of really interesting people, including other people in the education field, and I met people that were working for the Holocaust Museum, and they gave us like all these resources, stuff to take home, and a really excellent program. Really one of the greatest things I've ever done. So again, if you're an educator or if you know anyone who is, and they might be interested to take a screenshot of this or a picture with your phone, it's going to be June 26th through 28th. It's a live stream and it's free. So this has been our tour of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. as I mentioned, this is one of a 3-part series of programs you do on the Holocaust. The other 2 being the program on Anne Frank, which we'll put on our schedule at some point in time in the near future. And then we also do a program on Auschwitz, which we'll also put that. Just because of the video content we use in these programs, we're not able to record any of these for our YouTube channel, unfortunately, but we just offer them live on a regular basis. You can look out for those. And then, so I'm currently back home in Texas after being gone for many weeks for work. And I started hosting in-person tours and things like that in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And previously we visited the Holocaust Museum in Dallas. Not sure if you've been there before. If you're in North Texas, it's not too far from the John F. Kennedy Museum. It's actually just like, I think, 3 blocks away. So if you know where Dealey Plaza is, the Dallas Holocaust Museum is right there. We went on a tour of it last summer. I think it was 4th of July weekend, if I'm not mistaken, and we'll do it again sometime later this year. So if you ever want to join us, you should come join our sister group. If you haven't already, it's called Dallas, Texas History and Culture. You can find it on Eventbrite, Facebook, Meetup, and as of yesterday, YouTube. And again, it's called Dallas, Texas History and Culture. For those of you joining us from Washington, D.C., New York, London, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see, let's check back in with Patty one last time before we call it wrap for the day. Patty, we ran over a little bit on time. Sorry about that, but anything you wanted to add before we called it a day?
Well, if anybody missed it and they're a fast writer, Joanne has like offered a whole bunch of resources in the Q&A. There's like about 6 or 7 things if you want to quickly try to jot anything down.
I'll leave the chat open for a while in case someone wants to copy or paste any of the things.
Okay, yeah, that because I don't know.
I don't have an easy way to email all that kind of stuff because of time limitations, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't know how to transfer it into the chat, so I've just been leaving it on the Q&A walls if people want to look at it. One thing I would like.
The best thing to do is just take a picture with your phone or a screenshot.
One thing I'd like to say is this is not the first time, but occasionally we've had people that come into the programs and decide they want to tell their own narrative. And it's understandable that people might have a different facts that they think they want to offer. However, it is always important to understand that these are Robert's programs. So when you're asked to desist from countering Robert's programming, I would really.
Yeah, that's fine. Hey, you don't have to have the same opinion as me. Go do your own program if somebody wants to.
But unfortunately, it has the effect of spreading very propagandistic information that I would rather people not have to be exposed to. So,
okay. Thank you.
I apologize for saying it, but this was a really egregious case in this program. And I would just like people who participate to be aware that some people are going to post things that you can't necessarily just take at surface value. Discussion is valuable, and I think we all mostly appreciate that, but insisting on alternative facts is not welcome here. Thank you.
Oh yeah, no, and that's, and well, it's funny because certain programs kind of attract those kind of opinions. And like I noticed when we talked about Monet's garden, there's really not much controversy there, but if you're talking about something related to the Holocaust or some other topic, get people excited. But yeah,
exactly. And I think we spoke in the beginning. I mean, this is such a delicate time in the world, not just in this country, but in the world, that I believe most of us here have an understanding of a commitment to be responsible to our social duty. So yeah, I apologize if anybody was misled by anything that was in there. I appreciate the efforts of most people to try to keep this a reasonable civil conversation and exchange of information, but not to hijack the story.
Right. Okay, well, excellent. Well, thank you, Patty. Appreciate all that you do. Thank you so much, Patty, the pride of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And so we were going to have our program, we were going to stream the Truman film this weekend, but I need to delay that for a little bit because I tied up on other things at the moment, but we will be doing that hopefully later the month of May. So if you were hoping that we were watch the Truman film this weekend, that'll be coming soon, but not this weekend. But I want to thank everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Like I said, if you're in Dallas, Texas, or North Texas, or know anybody that wants to go check out history and culture stuff in person, you can let us know about our sister group, which is on Eventbrite, Facebook, and YouTube. And I thought I'd end on a positive note. These are just some pictures from, we just, this May is our 1-year anniversary of doing the programs live in person in Dallas. And so this video just kind of the highlights a few of the programs we had the past year. So with that, I want to wish everyone a great rest of your Saturday and a great weekend. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Blessings all. Thank you.